people will try and out-train a lack of intensity to make it hard. It means you need to do more volume, as opposed to let's just strip it back and focus on a bit more quality, meaning intensity in our training. And then as a result, we don't need to do as much because we're going to get some stimulus, and then we call it a session, come back in 2 days, we've adapted, we're going to be better.
Welcome back to the Athlete's Edge podcast. Today we're diving into how to maximise your training results while you can, because time and energy unfortunately aren't infinite. You can't chase a sporting career forever. Your athletic window is short, especially compared to the rest of your life. So that's why we talk so much about thinking bigger than just training for your sport, because how you train now shapes far more than just your next season.
Exactly. You're not going to be playing prime footy or running personal bests and being at our peak performance into our 80s. That's just reality, unfortunately. So we want to maximise our opportunities in the short term, whether that comes to our sport, and if that's a pro career, then great. So for those, it's about getting the most out of every session you can now, because like you said, the window's pretty small. But what you do now doesn't just impact your performance today. It builds the body you're going to live with for the rest of your life. You only get one, so we've got to always have a sort of focus on that as well.
So where do most athletes go wrong when it comes to maximising their training results?
Where most go wrong, which we'll skip past, is probably doing nothing. So just sort of thinking sport's enough. But if we talk about people who probably have the right intentions and are trying to do more than just sport, they typically chase the wrong things. And I know this because I've done it myself. When I was younger and playing sport, I was really obsessed with strength. It's still comments we hear all the time, you know, what do you bench, what do you squat? I think it's only natural. So for me, every block was sort of about heavier. You know, could I get more weight on the bar, chasing those numbers? Definitely made me strong. So my best, I was 130, 135 bench press, but it didn't necessarily make me better in my sport, which was the key. I was only ever average, maybe slightly above average from a speed perspective, which had big implications for my sporting career. Now I've got sort of knees and hips and a shoulder that I have to manage because of how I train then. Not necessarily any sort of one-off injury, but just wear and tear. You only need to look at the best bodybuilders and powerlifters who obviously put their body through a lot of hard training nearly every day. By the time they get to 40s, 50s, they're struggling to walk without pain, some of them, and a lot of them, not in a great way. So I like to think of it as we only get a certain number of miles with our bodies. So we want to be smart with how we're going to use them. And then obviously with an eye on how we're going to maximise that long term.
Yeah, and that's probably the point there where we don't really think about the long term too much when we're in the moment. And that's where, training isn't just about getting stronger, it's about moving and performing better for long term. So when you still stay capable in your 40s, 50s and 60s.
Absolutely. So strength work, gym training should serve your performance, not limit it. So, it should be helping. The goal is to build a body that can perform and keep performing. So think of on-field and beyond. If we polarize, training, or we chase one thing too heavy, we tend to do so at the expense of everything else. So say getting really strong, but then sacrificing some mobility, because we're not maybe using full range because we're focusing on the lift. So, your half rep things. So it's, use it or lose it. So chasing strength and what are you doing to your joints? If you're not necessarily a great squatter and you want to get big numbers, are you sort of, creating issues in around your hips and your knees when you could have backed off and done things better? Or if you're only in the gym trying to get strong, are you doing conditioning, which we know, VO2 max and your aerobic fitness is really important, not for sport, but to live longer and offset some of those concerns later in life. So, and we know if you don't do it now, it only gets harder later on. I'm going through that. So, it's thinking, I guess not too polarizing. We've got to have a focus, but it's just making sure we've got a well-rounded program.
And that's probably a good reminder for our young athletes who are, still trying to get the most out of themselves during their athletic window and I guess their draft window. So,
yep. Yeah, and I get it, but you've still got to zoom out a little bit. So your athletic window is short, absolutely. You've only got a few key years where your speed, your coordination, your power are the most adaptable, so the most trainable. So if you waste those years chasing the wrong focus, you can't go back and redo them. And that will impact you now and the future version of yourself.
So you've mentioned before your experience in high school. So can you share that story again for us, please?
Yeah, so it probably links to like training what matters. So like I said, I was in the gym from sort of 16, flying blind, getting stronger, started to build a bit of muscle, but not necessarily thinking back, like necessarily helping my footy much. So it was my top age third year. The seniors weren't overly strong that year, so the thirds trained with the seniors pretty much all year. Every Tuesday, Thursday night, we'd do a 15-minute speed block at the start with a former, speed coach, former runner themselves. That year, because it was my last year of high school, I actually jumped in and did the running events. So I was more swimmer often because I wasn't fast. I didn't do the sprinting, but I ran a 12-second flat 100 and a 24-second flat 200. Made it through to the next level. I attribute that to those short 15-minute bouts because that was the only time I was really doing any speed stuff. But what that taught me is running properly, got more confident with my running, showed me the difference from a training perspective of what if you just do really focused, high quality work. And this was, like relays and, stuff with like, 10 metre efforts, slow walk back, like stuff that was really intense. Imagine all the thirds and seniors lined up, there's 10 guys running, trying to race. Like it was really high intent. Not a lot of technique change, but it was this stuff I wasn't doing.
That's probably where like a common mistake for athletes especially is they look at the total volume of the session and if they try and get as many Ks as they can because they think that's what's, I guess, right, and they want to sort of get to 10 Ks or do 12K sessions, whereas you can probably do the same amount of or get the same amount of benefit out of a 4K session where it's a bit more higher intent or even with your sprinting stuff.
Yeah, and we see it, we'll see it in the next few weeks. There'll be AFL guys train really hard, but there'll be sessions that like O&M clubs will do, which is more volume than AFL. And it's because the intensity's not there. And I think, like to your point, is people will try and out-train a lack of intensity to make it hard. Means you need to do more volume, as opposed to let's just strip it back and focus on a bit more quality, meaning intensity in our training. And then as a result, we don't need to do as much because we're going to get some stimulus, and then we call it a session, come back in 2 days, we've adapted, we're going to be better.
And so if we sort of transition to what you've got up on the whiteboard here, a bit of a sort of success chain or steps, if you want to call it that, can you explain that for us and run us through that?
Yeah, so it came off a little bit around sort of different scenarios and I guess sort of mistakes, but maybe what people don't value enough with their training. So we sort of had it as, if you're at the bottom here, your own is sort of training on your own. So yes, you're going to need a lot of discipline, but it's typically pretty slow because you're not going to get any feedback. There's no real accountability. There's no correction off that if you miss sessions or if you're doing the wrong sort of stuff. So you're flying blind a little bit. Then you add in some training partners. Typically you start with your mates, which is good because now you're going to probably have a little bit more accountability and there is potentially someone watching you, but they probably got as much clue as you do. So you're still flying blind, but now you're at least flying blind as a collective. Then you add a program in, so then at least you've got some direction. So there's some structure. Hopefully it's a good program where you're building some overload, but you're still again a bit blind to how to execute it. But at least you've got a map that you're trying to follow. Then we had the coach, which now you're actually adding in a bit more feedback. The problem there is the quality of coach obviously dictates the quality of feedback, but it's another layer now with accountability. So now you're accountable to someone else, not just yourself, not just your training partners, but now someone that's responsible for your results. So it adds another layer in there. Potentially some problem solving around if you plateau or go backwards. There's some other options. Like-minded athletes is a big one because now you've got sort of, hopefully the energy of your environment, the competitiveness, some of the standards you're seeing helps drive you a bit more. So that's why we had that as a next layer. The one above is more like your competition. So whether that's competitions for spots, and they could still be people you classify as friends or mates or teammates, that maybe like at your local club, there's 3 or 4 guys, probably fighting for 1 or 2 midfield spots or, half back roles or whatever it is. Or even better again is some of our rep squads we see training with guys that are your actual rival. Even better locally, guys that you play against each week or 2-3 times a year, and especially if you're trying to catch them, because now you've actually got that rival, which really drives your competition and your focus. And then lastly is the facility. I'd say this is the last 1%, but this is just how it all comes together. And it's basically, when you've got everything else lined, it really helps, because now it's just like, is it a bit easier to do certain training sessions? Like, can you do different exercises because you've got the right equipment? Or does the session flow a bit better? Do you have access to some recovery stuff? Like, it's the icing on the cake, which is why it's at the top. But people often think like top facility, but if you're still doing that on your own, you're really no better off. So it's actually all these, it's almost the support type options that people I think neglect. They kind of do it on their own, maybe train with a few mates, maybe it's a good facility they're in, but then that's where they think they're ticking the boxes. But that's where I'd argue they're missing probably 4 of the biggest steps in that sort of chain that gives you the best chance of success in the shortest amount of time.
So what can athletes actually do to get more out of their training time and energy so that they're not wasting a lot of their resources?
Yeah, so if I sort of broke it down into maybe 4 key things, the first one I would say is being really clear on what you're working towards. So clarity will drive progress. So if you're not sure what you're trying to improve, then every session, it's easy for it to become fairly random. So you're swapping exercise in and out, you'll do what the person next to you is doing, that sort of stuff, because you're not clear on what you're supposed to be doing. Like, I'm sure you see Darcy around, and it's like he sort of sees what others are doing next to him, and he'll maybe engage conversation stuff. Then he's like back to his exercise. It's not, oh, that's cool, do I give that a try? It's like, that's cool, great, now I've got to go back to my exercise. So he's clear on what he needs and gets it done. Secondly, I would say is train for performance, not punishment. So it sort of links into what we were saying before about the volume stuff. You don't need to feel destroyed to get better. Yes, there'll be times where you're tired and it's hard, absolutely. But you should feel a session, whether it was hard or not, feeling like you've built something, not that you had to survive the whole time. If you're feeling like that, especially in the first half of the session, it's probably too hard, and it's not going to be something that you need to keep pushing through for 45, 60 minutes. I've always found a good sign is if a session feels like they go pretty quick. That's probably a pretty good session. You're intent, you're focused in on what you're doing. It's probably enjoyable in the sense that you're not watching the clock the whole time. If you're watching your watch the whole time and trying to survive it, then you're probably more in the punishment than performance focus. Third, I'd say obviously recovery is a big one. So I think the mindset is improvement happens between your sessions, not during your session. So you get a stimulus, how you recover is actually how you adapt and the benefit you get from that training. So if you're not fueling, sleeping, even managing your stress, you're training at half your capacity. And the last one is the move well first. So it goes back to our quality will unlock performance. So if you can't move efficiently, every rep you do is a missed opportunity to get better. So you're just reinforcing the wrong things as opposed to trying to improve and then add load and speed and volume off the back of that. It's why I don't count sessions I don't see. So I was talking to another elite coach in another sport about this who feels the same. So he tracks attendance. If you're away, he doesn't mark you as a strike against, it's got a 3-strike rule, doesn't mark you a strike against you, but he doesn't count it as a session. If you go on holidays, even if he knows about it, because he only counts sessions he sees. And I'm very big on that because it's quality. And I don't think you can do quality without being in the right environment, having people around you, some competition, having a coach, having the right program, which I think for me is all for us under that one facility where we try and do all of it and include all of it in there.
So to wrap it all up, what's, I guess, the one big takeaway for athletes out there?
Yeah, I think one athletic window. So you've got sort of one shot to have a crack at that dream, I guess, of pro sport, but at the same time, you've got one body. So it's balancing those two. So train with intent, make every session count now, maximise the time and energy and opportunities you've got and you've been given. So if that's kids with parents and stuff that they're trying to do for them, because they won't always be there, but be mindful of your future. You can't compromise short-term gains for that long-term performance.